I saw her first as a silhouette against the lake, shoulders hunched, both hands wrapped around the handle of a suitcase too heavy for one small woman. The water was iron gray, the hour just after dinner, when the neighborhood joggers pass and no one looks too closely. She shoved. The suitcase skidded, caught a lip of stone, and toppled in with a dense private splash. I whispered, to keep the air from breaking, "Please, God, let it not be what I think." I ran anyway, because hope is a stubborn thing. My name is Helen Carter. I am 69 years old, and I have lived beside this Wisconsin lake long enough to know how sound travels over water and straight into a person's bones. I wish I could tell you that what I saw was a trick of light, a grieving woman tossing memories to drown. But grief does not sink neatly. It expands. It finds you in your kitchen and in your shoes and in your sleep. It took my son last winter on a black ice road, and it settled over our small house like a heavy quilt no one asked for. The woman at the water's edge was my daughter-in-law. Her name is Megan. When she turned away from the splash and started toward the parking lot, she moved like someone who had walked through fire and decided to keep walking. She did not look back. I wanted to call out, to say her name the way a mother says a child's name when the child has crossed into traffic. I did not. I ran to the shore instead, my knees arguing and my breath hot with panic. You do not expect to feel the weight of a life through canvas. You do not expect your fingers to slip on the cold zipper because they are shaking, and you certainly do not expect to hear a small, choked sound that is not quite a cry and not quite silence. I did. I pulled. I opened. The smell of damp fabric and something sweetly chemical hit me. I saw a bundle of blankets and a face the size of my palm, blue at the lips, blinking like a lighthouse in fog. "Oh, baby," I said, and my voice came out new, as if I had borrowed a younger woman's strength for one necessary minute. "Oh, baby, I have you." The doctors would later tell me about body temperature and seconds that feel like hours. But in that moment, there were only two truths. The first was that my grandson was alive. The second was that my daughter-in-law had put him in a suitcase and fed him to the lake. I was not ready to carry those truths together. So I chose the one that breathed and moved. I tucked him to my chest, blankets and all, and the world narrowed to the beat of a small heart under my coat. Somewhere, a pair of teenagers laughed. A dog barked once, twice, like an accusation. I listened for footsteps behind me. None came. Megan had gone, leaving the dark to close behind her like a curtain. If you had asked me yesterday what kind of woman I am, I would have said simple things. I bake cinnamon bread for church. I talk to my roses. I save too many plastic containers because you never know. I would have told you I am a mother who learned to be a widow, and a mother-in-law who tries hard not to be the cliché people hiss about at holiday tables. I would not have said that inside my quiet chest there is a spine of iron called boundaries, that I know the difference between love and the kind that demands a woman be a mother as an ATM, a nurse on call, a forgiving wall for every bad day. Silent abuse wears soft slippers. It clicks on a light in the hallway at 3 a.m. and whispers that dignity is selfish. I have learned to hear it and call it by its name. When Daniel died, I opened my door to Megan and to the baby growing inside her. That is what family does when the weather turns. We taught ourselves a new language together, one made of casseroles you cannot taste, and bills you forget to open, and long afternoons where you circle the same argument like a drain. Some days I saw kindness in her, a small animal that startled easily. Other days I saw something colder. Grief can make you a stranger to yourself. It can also give you permission to be cruel and call it survival. I will not decorate that night with excuses. Somewhere between the person I wanted to be and the person I needed to become, I chose. I chose the armful of shivering life pressed against me. I chose to run. I chose to call for help with a voice that did not shake, because a baby deserves more than a grandmother's trembling. Later I will tell you about the way justice limps and then learns to sprint, about lawyers who smile without their eyes, and about the courage it takes to put an end to a story that wants to keep swallowing you. I will tell you about respect and what it costs, and about the freedom that is not a flag, but a room where a child sleeps safely. Tonight, at the water's edge, I learned this first lesson again. Love is not a feeling. It is a decision you make when your hands are already cold. I pressed my cheek to his head and promised the air, I will keep you. I will keep you. Some promises settle on the tongue like a prayer and taste like iron. This one did. I have never been more afraid, and I have never been more certain. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I love hearing how far these stories travel. At the hospital, time bent and thinned until every second felt like a decision. The hallways smelled of antiseptic and old coffee, and the fluorescent lights buzzed above me like insects that refused to rest. Nurses rushed the baby through a set of double doors, and someone asked me to wait. Waiting is what mothers do best, but that night the word felt like punishment. I sat with my hands clasped so tight that my wedding band left a mark deep enough to sting. A young doctor finally came toward me, his voice gentle but practiced. He said the words in a measured way, the kind people use when they want to sound hopeful but not promise too much. The baby was alive. He had water in his lungs and traces of a sedative in his blood. He would need monitoring, warmth, time. When he asked if I was the child's grandmother, I said yes before he finished the question. It was the first time I had claimed that word since Daniel's funeral. They let me see him once the tubes were in place. His tiny chest rose and fell under a tangle of machines, and the sound of his breathing filled the room like a fragile metronome. I whispered his name, Eli. It had been Daniel's middle name, and saying it out loud anchored me to something good. I didn't care if the nurses heard. I didn't care that Megan was somewhere out there, free and moving through the night. The only thing that mattered was that this small, battered life still existed. A police officer arrived while I was still by the bed. His notebook was new, his questions sharp. What time had I been at the lake? Did I see anyone else? How did I know the baby? I answered carefully, aware of how quickly truth can sound like invention when your voice shakes. He wrote everything down and told me someone would come in the morning for a full statement. When he left, I saw one nurse exchange a look with another. Pity, doubt, curiosity, all tangled together. I called the only person I could think of, my neighbor Ruth. She drove me home before dawn, her car filled with the scent of cinnamon gum and dog hair. She didn't ask what happened, only squeezed my hand at red lights. When we pulled into my driveway, the porch light I'd forgotten to switch off made the frost on the steps sparkle. For a moment, I let myself pretend that this was just another winter morning, that Daniel would call later, that Megan would sleep upstairs with the baby's cries on the monitor. Inside, silence waited like an accusation. A single bottle sat on the counter beside an open jar of formula powder. Megan's coat was gone. Her phone charger still dangled from the wall socket. I found the nursery door half open, the crib empty but neatly arranged, as if she had planned every detail except the one that mattered. I sat on the edge of the bed, and grief washed over me with a different texture this time. Less like sadness, more like a warning. I remembered Daniel's voice from months before his death, telling me that Megan was struggling, that she needed help, but wouldn't take it. I had told him that love was enough. I see now that love without boundaries becomes surrender, and surrender disguised as compassion can be dangerous. By the time the sun rose, my house felt smaller. I made coffee but couldn't taste it. I turned on the television for company and heard the local news mention a police search near the lake. They said a woman was wanted for questioning in connection with a possible child endangerment case. They didn't say her name, but I didn't need them to. I looked around the kitchen, photos on the fridge, Daniel's college mug, the small plant Megan had once watered with meticulous care, and I realized something that both comforted and terrified me. I was the only one left who could tell this child's story truthfully. Whatever Megan had done, whatever the world decided to believe, Eli's life had been saved by accident or fate, and I was now responsible for turning that accident into a future. When I returned to the hospital later that morning, the nurse smiled softly and said the baby had opened his eyes for the first time. She placed my hand over his, small and warm now, and for a moment, the noise of machines faded. I told her I'd bring blankets from home, the soft ones Daniel used as a child. She nodded and wrote something on a clipboard, but I hardly noticed. I was thinking about what it would mean to protect him from now on. Not just from Megan, but from a system that might see me as a tired old woman clinging to ghosts. That night, as I sat beside the incubator, Eli stirred and made a sound almost like a sigh. It was the smallest proof of life I had ever witnessed, and yet it filled the entire room. I promised him again that he would not be alone, even if I had to stand in front of every storm that came. The nurse turned off the overhead light. Shadows folded around us, and for the first time since the lake, I felt the tremor of something close to peace. Morning arrived, wrapped in the dull hum of machines and the smell of hospital coffee that never tastes quite right. I watched the sunlight crawl across the white tile floor and stop at the foot of Eli's crib. He slept with his tiny fist curled near his chin, the faintest rhythm under his soft skin. The nurse told me his breathing had stabilized through the night, that his body temperature was holding steady. I nodded, but inside me there was a trembling that no good news could quiet. Detective Nora Briggs came around noon. She looked like someone who had seen too many kinds of grief and stopped judging any of them. Her coat hung loose around her shoulders, and she carried a small notebook that seemed older than she was. When she introduced herself, her tone was polite but careful, as if she was unsure whether to treat me as a witness or a suspect. "Helen, I understand you were the one who found the child," she said. "Yes," I answered, keeping my voice level. "He's my grandson." "And his mother?" I hesitated. "She's my daughter-in-law, Megan Carter. She's gone." Detective Briggs nodded slowly and wrote something down. She asked about the night at the lake, what time I arrived, whether I saw Megan leave in a car, if anyone else was nearby. I told her everything I could remember, the splash, the cold, the way the suitcase felt heavier than it should. When I finished, she looked at me for a long time before saying, "You've been through something unimaginable, Helen, but we have to verify every detail. Sometimes shock makes memory a tricky thing." Her words were kind on the surface, but carried a shadow underneath. I understood it. She needed to doubt me. That was her job. Still, it hurt to hear uncertainty in her tone, as though love itself required proof. When she left, I called the nurse to check on Eli one more time. His small hand twitched when I touched him, a reflex, but I chose to believe it was recognition. I told him stories softly about the house by the lake and the maple tree that turns red every October. I told him his father loved that tree. I did not tell him that his father died too soon, or that his mother might never come back. Those truths could wait. That afternoon, I went home to rest, but the house no longer felt like mine. The walls seemed to echo with conversations that never really ended. Megan's sweater still hung over a chair. On the kitchen counter sat a letter addressed to an insurance company, half written and unsigned. My heart tightened when I saw Daniel's name typed neatly in the subject line. I slipped it into my pocket without opening it. Some things ask for the right moment, and this wasn't it. I walked through each room, picking up small objects that once meant nothing and now felt like clues. A broken teacup, an empty perfume bottle, a baby shoe under the sofa. Grief makes detectives of us all. We search for reasons, as if logic could tame what has already burned. Later, Ruth came by with soup. She placed her hand over mine and said, "You need rest, Helen." I told her I couldn't sleep, not until I knew Megan was found. She hesitated before asking, "Do you think she meant to hurt the baby?" I looked out the window, where the lake shimmered under a pale sun, and answered, "I think she meant to end her pain, and she didn't care who she took with her." Ruth didn't reply. Some silences are too true to fill. That evening, the phone rang. It was Detective Briggs again. They had located Megan's car abandoned near a rest stop 30 miles away. No sign of her yet. She asked me to come to the station in the morning to answer a few more questions. Her voice carried that same practiced calm, but I caught something new, an edge of curiosity, maybe doubt turning into suspicion. After hanging up, I sat at the kitchen table and opened Daniel's old photo album. His smile looked younger than I remembered, and the pages smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. I thought of how he used to hold Megan's hand, like he believed love alone could hold back the dark. We all want to believe that. But sometimes love blinds you to the storm already forming inside your own house. As the sky outside deepened to violet, I made myself a promise. Whatever the police believed, whatever Megan had done, I would not let my grandson's story end in whispers or headlines. I would guard his life the way my son once guarded his dreams, with faith that borders on stubbornness. When I finally turned off the light, the lake gleamed through the window, calm and deceptive. I understood now that it had not taken anything from me that night. It had given something back, proof that love, even buried under betrayal, can still surface when you least expect it. The police station smelled of paper and tired air. A clerk led me to a small room with a metal table and 2 plastic chairs, the kind meant to remind you that comfort is a privilege. Detective Briggs entered a few minutes later, balancing 2 coffees. She handed me one and said, "It's terrible, but it's warm." I took it, grateful for something to hold. She began with questions I had already answered at the hospital. What time had I gone to the lake? Why was I there? How exactly had I seen the suitcase? I repeated every detail, watching her pen move across the page in short, efficient strokes. When she looked up again, her eyes were softer, though her voice stayed steady. "Helen, I need to ask this carefully. Is there any reason your daughter-in-law might say you wanted custody of the baby for yourself?" The question landed like a slap. I felt my pulse jump. Custody? No. I wanted peace for all of us. Megan was struggling. I tried to help. Briggs nodded, still writing. "Neighbors said they heard arguments, loud ones, especially the week before your son's death." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. "My son's death was an accident." "I know," she said, "but sometimes accidents have a trail." The word trail stuck in my head as she continued, asking about Daniel's insurance, about whether Megan had money problems, whether my son had ever spoken of changing his will. I realized then that this investigation was no longer just about a near tragedy at the lake. It was about everything that had led to it. When the questions ended, she thanked me and told me to rest. As I walked out into the bright noon, I felt stripped, as though she had taken not just my words, but the air around them. At home, I found Ruth waiting on the porch, a newspaper folded under her arm. "They've printed it," she said, her voice low. The front page showed a photo of the lake, police tape glowing yellow in the sun. The headline read, "Grandmother Rescues Infant After Mysterious Incident." My name was in the second paragraph, along with a single cruel line. "Authorities are investigating conflicting accounts between family members." I sat down hard on the step. "Conflicting accounts," I repeated. "That means they think I could be lying." Ruth sighed. "People talk, Helen. You saved that baby. That's all that matters." But it wasn't all that mattered. Reputation is a thin armor when truth becomes entertainment. That night I returned to the hospital. The nurse said Eli was improving. His eyes followed movement now, and when I spoke, his mouth twitched like a smile. I held his hand and whispered, "We're in this together, you and I." He blinked, and I imagined he understood. When the nurse left us alone, I leaned close to him and spoke softly, more to myself than to him. "You have a mother who lost her way, and a father who lost his life. But you also have me, and I'm not going anywhere. Whatever storm is coming, we will stand in it." As I left the hospital, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I hesitated before answering. A woman's voice, sharp and thin, came through. "You think you've won, Helen?" It was Megan. My heart froze. "He's mine," she said. "You took him from me." "Megan, please." The line went dead. I stood in the parking lot, phone trembling in my hand. She was alive, hiding, watching, and she was angry. When I told Detective Briggs about the call the next morning, she wrote down every word and promised to trace it. Her face was calm, but there was something else there now. Recognition, maybe even concern. "If she reaches out again, don't engage," she said. "We'll handle it." After she left, I sat by the lake, the wind cutting cold against my face. The water looked the same as the night I pulled Eli from it, quiet, deceptive, deep. I thought about Megan's voice on the phone, how grief had twisted her into someone I barely knew. I still remembered the girl she once was, laughing in my kitchen, painting her nails while Daniel cooked dinner. Somewhere, that girl was buried under rage and fear, but I couldn't save her anymore. I closed my eyes and whispered to the wind, "Love should not mean losing yourself to someone else's darkness." That was the moment I understood what this would become. Not just a fight for Eli's safety, but for my own dignity. The lake shimmered, reflecting the weak winter sun. I realized that survival wasn't about waiting for justice to arrive. It was about choosing to stand, even when the ground beneath you feels like water. I did not sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the echo of Megan's voice over the phone, sharp, accusing, filled with a kind of rage that had forgotten where it began. I sat in the dark living room, watching the lights of passing cars sweep across the walls, each one pulling a different memory with it. The day Daniel brought Megan home for the first time. Their wedding, where laughter filled the air like music. The night of the accident, when police lights flickered through these same windows and shattered everything we knew. Morning found me still in the chair, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of cedar. The phone rang again, but it wasn't Megan. It was Detective Briggs. She told me they had traced the call to a prepaid phone purchased 2 towns over. They were searching for footage from nearby gas stations. Her voice stayed calm, but I could sense the urgency underneath. "She's running, Helen," she said. "But people who run make mistakes. We'll find her." After the call, I went to the kitchen and tried to eat, though the food felt foreign in my mouth. I looked out the window toward the lake, its surface calm, almost innocent. The same lake that had swallowed the suitcase now reflected a perfect blue sky. There was something cruel about that. Nature never apologizes for what it witnesses. At noon, Ruth arrived with a small bag of groceries. She didn't say much, just started unloading things into the refrigerator like she'd been doing it for years. "You can't fall apart now," she said quietly. "He needs you." "I know," I replied, "but it feels like the world is turning me into a suspect instead of a grandmother." Ruth gave me a tired smile. "You're both, Helen. You're human. And the world doesn't know what to do with women who refuse to collapse." Her words stayed with me all afternoon. I returned to the hospital later to find Eli awake and alert. His eyes were the same shade of brown as Daniel's, soft and questioning. I hummed the lullaby I used to sing to my son when storms rattled the windows. For the first time, Eli smiled, a small, uneven thing, but enough to pierce through the fog of fear. As I sat there, I felt the weight of the last few weeks pressing down. Daniel's death, Megan's unraveling, the suitcase, the police. Yet beneath it all, something new stirred, an understanding that love was no longer a feeling I waited to receive. It was an act I chose every hour. Detective Briggs came by again that evening. She carried a folder thick with papers and photographs. "Helen," she said, "we found something you should see." She placed a picture on the table. A still from a traffic camera showing Megan's car near a pawn shop, taken 2 days before the lake incident. We checked the shop. She sold several of Daniel's belongings, including his watch and laptop. "Why?" I asked, though I already feared the answer. "We think she was desperate for money," the detective replied. "And we found records that your son changed his will shortly before the accident. Everything was to go to his future children. If she knew that—" "She had a reason," I whispered. Detective Briggs looked at me with the kind of empathy that makes you feel naked. "We're not there yet, Helen, but I need you to be prepared. Sometimes the truth doesn't just free us. It breaks what's left before it heals." After she left, I walked to the nursery they'd set up for Eli in the hospital's pediatric ward. I watched him sleep, his chest rising and falling, small fingers twitching in dream. I thought about the word inheritance, how it isn't just money or property, but the invisible things we pass down. Pain, silence, courage. In that quiet room, I made another decision. I would not let Eli inherit his parents' ghosts. Whatever the investigation uncovered, whatever the headlines said, I would make sure his story began with love, not tragedy. When I returned home, I opened the window to let the night air in. The lake shimmered under the moonlight, and for the first time in weeks, I wasn't afraid of it. It had already shown me the worst it could hold, and I was still standing. I whispered to the dark water, "You tried to take him, but you gave him back. You tried to drown me, too, but I learned how to breathe." The wind carried the words away, and I let them go with it. The next morning, I woke to the sound of rain against the roof, soft at first, then steady, like a heartbeat that had finally found its rhythm. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold, reading and rereading the article that now filled the town's newspaper. Grandmother at Center of Lake Mystery cooperates with police investigation. They printed my name again. My picture, too, taken years ago at the library fundraiser, smiling beside a row of donated books. The photo looked like someone I used to know. I folded the paper and stared out the window. Across the lake, fog was lifting, and the trees stood bare against the gray sky. A police cruiser pulled into my driveway a few minutes later. It was Detective Briggs again, wearing the same worn coat and the same quiet authority. She carried another folder, heavier this time. "May I come in?" she asked. I nodded and led her to the table. She set the folder down and opened it to reveal a small collection of photographs, insurance papers, phone logs, and an image of Daniel's car twisted along the guardrail. I had spent months trying to forget that photo. "I need to ask something difficult," she said gently. "Did your son ever tell you about a change in his life insurance?" I shook my head. "No. He just told me he wanted to make sure Megan and the baby would be safe if anything happened. That's all." Briggs studied my face before sliding a document toward me. He updated his policy 3 months before the accident. He listed his future child as the sole beneficiary. The room tilted for a second, as though gravity had slipped. My hands began to tremble, but I forced them to stay still. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she placed another photograph on the table, Megan at a bank counter, withdrawing a large sum of cash 2 days before Daniel's death. "We don't jump to conclusions," she said softly, "but this isn't looking accidental anymore." I felt the air leave my body. My son's death, something I had forced myself to accept as cruel fate, suddenly had a shape, a reason, a human choice behind it. I looked down at the photograph again, at Megan's familiar face, calm and almost bored as she signed the papers. My heart clenched around something sharp and bitter. Briggs spoke again. "Helen, we're still gathering evidence, but I need to prepare you. If it's true, if she killed him for money, she might have seen the baby as a threat to that inheritance." I covered my mouth, afraid the sound I made would escape as a cry. "He trusted her," I whispered. "He thought she was grieving, and she made it look like grief," Briggs said. For a long moment, we sat in silence. The rain against the windows grew heavier, each drop tapping like a reminder that life keeps moving, even when yours has stopped. When Briggs left, she touched my shoulder and said, "You did the right thing that night, Helen. You saved him. Don't let anyone make you question that." After she was gone, I went to the nursery. Eli was home now, small but strong, sleeping in the crib I had rebuilt from Daniel's old one. I watched him for a while, listening to his soft breaths. The sight of him gave me something I didn't expect. Not peace exactly, but a sense of purpose that burned through the numbness. I sat beside the crib and spoke to him, though I knew he couldn't understand. "You are safe now, and I will make sure you stay that way, even if it means opening every wound I've spent my life trying to close." That evening, I took a walk to the edge of the lake. The rain had stopped, and the air smelled of earth and pine. The water reflected the low clouds like a bruise across the sky. I stood there until my shoes sank into the wet soil. The same spot where I had pulled Eli from the suitcase looked peaceful, almost holy. But I could still feel the chill in my bones, the weight of the zipper in my hands. I whispered, "Daniel, I'm going to find the truth. For you. For him." Somewhere behind me, a car door closed. I turned, startled, but saw no one, just the quiet road and the hum of wind through the trees. I told myself it was my imagination, though my skin prickled with the certainty that someone had been there. When I got home, a note was waiting on my porch. No envelope, just a single sheet folded once. The handwriting was unmistakable. "You shouldn't have taken him from me. You don't know what you've started." I held the note until the ink smudged against my thumb. The fear was back, sharp and familiar. But beneath it, a strange calm took root. Because now I knew Megan was watching, and that meant she hadn't disappeared into guilt or despair. She was planning something, and so was I. The following days passed in fragments: phone calls, police visits, restless nights where I left the lights on just to hear the quiet hum of electricity. Each sound felt like a warning. The note stayed on my kitchen counter under a glass paperweight, its edges curling slightly as if the words were trying to escape. Detective Briggs took it for fingerprints, but I had already memorized every curve of the handwriting. Megan's letters always leaned slightly to the left, like she was pushing against the world. Eli slept in the room next to mine now. The first night I brought him home from the hospital, I sat in the hallway listening to his breathing through the cracked door. Every sigh, every twitch made me think of the water closing over that suitcase. I told myself that if he could survive that, then so could I. Ruth came by with groceries again. "You need strength," she said, unpacking them without waiting for me to protest. "The storm's not over." "I know," I said, pouring coffee for both of us. "But it feels different now, like I'm waiting for something I already know is coming." "Do you think she'll come back here?" I nodded. "She wants something. Either the baby or whatever she thinks is left to claim." We sat in silence for a while, the sound of rain returning against the window. Ruth reached across the table and took my hand. "You're doing the right thing, Helen. Just promise me you'll call the police if she shows up." "I promise," I said, though we both knew I might not. Some battles feel too personal to surrender. That afternoon I received a call from the detective again. Her tone had shifted, firmer, more certain. "Helen, we found something," she said. "There's evidence that your son's car was tampered with before the crash. Brake lines cut." My heart stopped. "We're running prints from the tools we recovered near Megan's storage unit. It may take a few days, but we're close." After hanging up, I stood by the window watching the lake ripple under the wind. The world outside looked almost calm, yet my body felt as if it were bracing for impact. I thought of Daniel's laugh, the easy warmth in it, how he used to say that forgiveness was the only real freedom. But forgiveness without truth isn't healing. It's surrender. That evening, after putting Eli to bed, I sat in Daniel's old study. His desk still held a jar of pens, a stack of unpaid bills, and a photograph of him holding a newborn puppy. I lit a small candle beside it. "You deserved better," I whispered. "You both did." As the flame flickered, headlights swept across the wall outside. My heart jumped. I moved quietly to the window. A dark sedan idled at the edge of the driveway, its lights dimmed. Then slowly, it backed away and disappeared down the road. I called Detective Briggs, told her what I saw. She promised to send a patrol car through the neighborhood, but by the time it arrived, the road was empty again. Later that night, while checking on Eli, I found his blanket missing. My stomach dropped. I searched the crib, the floor, the hallway. Then I saw it. The blanket was folded neatly on the front porch railing, damp from the mist. Someone had been here. I called the detective again, my voice shaking. She arrived within minutes, along with 2 officers who searched the yard with flashlights. They found nothing, no footprints, no car tracks, no evidence except that wet blanket and my certainty. Briggs stood beside me, arms crossed, looking out into the darkness. "She's playing with you," she said quietly, "trying to make you feel unsafe." "It's working," I admitted. She turned to me, her expression sharp but not unkind. "Helen, you've shown more courage than most people could imagine. But this is the part where we draw lines. She's crossed too many already." I looked toward the lake, its dark surface reflecting the faint glow of the porch light. "Lines," I repeated. "Yes. It's time." The next day, I went into town to meet with a lawyer about custody. It felt strange walking into an office with the faint smell of lemon polish and hearing myself say the words, "legal guardian." The lawyer, a woman about my age with kind eyes, listened carefully. "Given the circumstances," she said, "and if the charges proceed as they appear, you stand a strong chance of gaining full custody. But you'll need patience. The system moves slower than justice." Patience. I had lived my whole life practicing that word. I could wait again, this time for the truth to rise. When I returned home, I stood at the window, looking at the lake's stillness. Somewhere out there, Megan was hiding, watching, planning. But for the first time, I didn't feel powerless. I felt ready. Because love, when stripped of illusion, becomes something fierce. And I was no longer just a grieving mother or a frightened grandmother. I was the storm waiting to break. By the end of that week, winter began to fold itself deeper into the town. The lake froze along its edges, thin sheets of ice catching bits of sunlight like broken glass. I bundled Eli in layers before taking him to his morning checkup. The doctor said his lungs were strong, his heartbeat steady. "He's a fighter," she said, smiling. I wanted to tell her that strength ran in the family, but I only nodded and kissed his small forehead. On the drive home, snow began to fall, gentle, almost kind. The radio hummed with Christmas songs, though the season felt far away from me. It had been just over 2 months since Daniel's accident, and the house still smelled faintly of the pine wreath he'd hung before he died. Sometimes grief moves in slow circles. You think you've reached its edge, only to find yourself back at the center. I carried Eli inside and set him in the crib, where he cooed softly. I stared at his tiny face and saw echoes of Daniel, his nose, his mouth, even the crease between his brows when he dreamed. For a moment, I let myself believe Daniel was still here, living on in that small, perfect expression. Then the phone rang. It was Detective Briggs again. Her voice was low and deliberate. "Helen, we've confirmed it. The fingerprints on the tools match Megan's. We're filing for a warrant today." The words hung in the air. I looked down at Eli, at the small miracle breathing in front of me. My son's death was no longer an accident. It was murder. Briggs continued. "She's still out there, but this gives us leverage. She'll make contact again. People like her can't resist control. When she does, we'll be ready." After she hung up, I stood in the quiet, my body trembling, but my mind cold and clear. For months, I had begged the world for answers. Now that I had them, I realized how heavy truth could be. Justice and pain often come dressed as twins. That night, I sat with Ruth by the fire, the baby asleep in my arms. The flames danced against the windows, turning the glass into gold. "So it's true," Ruth said softly. "She killed your boy." I nodded. "For money, for control, maybe for both." Ruth shook her head. "You should feel angry." "I do," I said, "but mostly I feel tired. Anger doesn't bring anyone back. It just burns the little piece you have left." We talked until the fire went low. When she left, I walked through the house, checking every lock. Outside, snow had thickened into silence. Somewhere beyond that stillness, I knew Megan was watching. Maybe from a motel room. Maybe from the dark woods beyond the lake. But she would come back. She had lost everything, except her rage. I set Eli's crib beside my bed and lay down, my hand resting near his tiny arm. Sleep came in thin slices. Sometime after midnight, a sound woke me, metal scraping against glass. I sat up. The window by the kitchen shuddered once, then again. My pulse quickened. I moved quietly through the dark, heart pounding. When I reached the kitchen, the curtain swayed slightly from a cold draft. I flicked on the light. A smear of mud streaked the windowsill, and something small lay on the floor. A pacifier. Eli's pacifier, the one that had gone missing from the diaper bag 2 days earlier. I pressed my hand against the counter to steady myself. She had been here. The next morning, the police searched the property again. Detective Briggs stood by the back door, jaw tight. "No prints," she said. "Whoever left it wore gloves." "Megan," I said. "She's taunting you, but this is good. It means she's nearby. She'll make a mistake." I looked at the pacifier inside the evidence bag. "She already made one," I said. "She taught me what fear feels like, and I'm done feeling it." That evening, I went to the lawyer's office again to finalize the custody petition. Signing my name on those documents felt like drawing a line through everything that had come before: the grief, the silence, the helplessness. This was the first step toward reclaiming what Megan had tried to destroy: family, safety, dignity. As I left, the lawyer handed me a copy of the papers. "You've been through hell, Helen," she said. "But people underestimate women who survive it." Driving home, snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in white. The lake shimmered under the moonlight, frozen now, still holding its secrets beneath the surface. I parked the car, carried Eli inside, and whispered as he drifted to sleep, "You're safe, my love. You're home. I won't let her take another thing from us." Outside, the snow kept falling, covering every trace of the footprints that had once haunted my porch. The following morning arrived white and silent, the kind of winter day that makes sound itself feel heavy. The snow had piled thick against the porch rails, turning the lake into a smooth sheet of ice that looked deceptively calm. I made coffee and stood by the window, watching my breath fog the glass. For the first time in weeks, Eli had slept through the night. The small rhythm of his breathing felt like a victory. Detective Briggs called just after sunrise. "We've issued a warrant," she said. "We've alerted the state line patrols and checked local bus stations. She won't get far." "Do you think she'll come here again?" I asked. Briggs paused before answering. "Yes, because the lake is her unfinished business." The phrase stayed with me long after the call ended. Unfinished business. The words fit too well. Everything about our lives, Daniel's death, the grief, the silence, had been left half-built, like a house no one finished painting. I spent the morning cleaning, trying to restore some kind of order. There's a strange comfort in scrubbing things that once held chaos. I washed the counters, folded laundry, and let Eli nap in the living room beside the fireplace. Each small act was a way to reclaim control, to remind myself that this home still belonged to us. Around noon, Ruth came by with fresh bread and her familiar warmth. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, eyeing the folded custody papers near my elbow. "When will you hear back?" she asked. "Soon, I hope," I said. "The lawyer thinks the judge will sign once the investigation confirms everything." Ruth nodded, then lowered her voice. "Do you think she knows about the papers?" "If she does," I said, "she'll see them as another theft." Megan doesn't lose quietly. After Ruth left, the house felt too still again. I put Eli in his crib and checked the locks one more time before stepping outside. The air was sharp with cold, and the snow crunched under my boots. I walked to the edge of the lake, where ice covered the place where I had pulled the suitcase out weeks before. The frozen surface looked peaceful, almost holy, but I could still feel the weight of that night pressing on my chest. As I stood there, a sound broke through the quiet, the faint whir of an engine. I turned and saw a dark sedan slowing at the curve of the road. My pulse jumped. It was the same car I'd seen idling outside my house before. It stopped for only a moment, then rolled forward and disappeared behind the trees. When I went back inside, I found a small envelope wedged under the front door. No address, no stamp. My heart thudded as I opened it. Inside was a single photograph. Eli in his hospital crib, taken from the hallway window. On the back, written in Megan's familiar hand, "He looks like his father." I sank into a chair, gripping the photo so tightly that the edges bent. The fear was back, cold and quick, but beneath it came something harder. I wasn't the same woman Megan had tried to break months ago. She could haunt me, but she couldn't control me anymore. I called Detective Briggs again, told her about the photo. "She's watching you closely," the detective said. "We'll increase patrols. Just keep your lights on and doors locked." "She wants me afraid," I said. "But fear is the one thing I don't owe her." "Good," Briggs replied. "Hold on to that." That evening, I built a small fire and sat beside it, holding Eli close. His warmth against my chest reminded me that survival is not always a loud victory. It's sometimes a quiet refusal to surrender. I thought of Daniel, of how his laughter used to fill this house. The world had taken so much, but it hadn't taken my will to fight. Before going to bed, I placed the photo on the mantel, not as a threat, but as a promise, to see this story through, to make sure truth had a voice. Outside, snow kept falling, covering the roads and the footprints that trailed along my porch. For a moment, I let myself imagine that the snow was burying the past too, layer by layer. Then Eli stirred, making a small, sleepy sound. I whispered into the quiet, "We're almost free, little one. Just a little longer." And somewhere beyond the lake, hidden in the dark, a woman watched the lights of our house glow against the snow and made her next move. 2 nights later, I woke to the sound of tires crunching over snow. At first, I thought it was the patrol car Detective Briggs had promised would circle the neighborhood. But when I looked out the window, no blue lights flashed. Only the faint shape of a sedan parked at the edge of my driveway, its engine idling, exhaust twisting into the frozen air like smoke from a quiet fire. I held my breath and waited. The engine cut off. Silence. Then the sound of a car door opening, closing softly, followed by footsteps on snow. Slow, deliberate, coming closer. I moved to Eli's room and stood beside his crib. His breathing was steady, his little hand resting against his cheek. I didn't want to turn on any lights, so I waited in the dark, counting the seconds. The footsteps stopped at the porch. A shadow passed over the thin curtains. Then 3 knocks, soft, almost polite. I swallowed hard. "Who's there?" My voice came out steady, though my hands were trembling. No answer. The knocks came again, this time harder. I took a breath and whispered to Eli, "Stay safe, baby," though he was asleep, lost in the calm only children seem to find. I walked toward the front door, heart pounding in my ears. Through the peephole, I saw nothing but darkness until a shape moved closer. A woman's face, half hidden beneath a hood, her breath fogging the glass. Megan. Her voice, muffled but unmistakable, came through the door. "Helen, please, we need to talk." I didn't open it. "The police are looking for you," I said. "You need to turn yourself in." "I just want to see him," she whispered. "He's my son." The calm in her tone scared me more than anger ever could. "He's safe now, Megan. Don't ruin that." For a moment, silence again. Then a sharp metallic sound, the doorknob twisting, locked but trembling under her grip. I stepped back, holding the phone in one hand, ready to call Detective Briggs. But then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. I heard retreating steps, the crunch of snow fading down the path. I rushed to the window and saw her running toward the car. She slipped once, caught herself, and drove off into the darkness. I called the police. Within minutes, a patrol car arrived, its lights bouncing off the frozen trees. The officers searched the area, but found only tire tracks leading toward the highway. Detective Briggs came soon after, her expression grim. "She's escalating," Briggs said. "She wants control again, but showing up like this means she's desperate." I sat at the table, hands wrapped around a mug of untouched coffee. "She didn't look desperate," I said quietly. "She looked determined." Briggs sighed. "Desperation and determination often look the same, but they end differently." She looked at me, eyes steady. "We'll move you and the baby to a safe location for a few days. Somewhere she can't find you." Leaving my home felt like tearing roots from the ground. Every photo, every creak of the floorboards carried Daniel's voice, his presence. But safety came first. I packed only what I needed: Eli's clothes, a few blankets, his favorite toy bear, and a framed picture of Daniel holding him as a newborn. The safe house was a small cottage on the outskirts of town, borrowed from a retired officer. It smelled faintly of cedar and rain. The walls were lined with books, the kind that looked untouched but loved. Detective Briggs stopped by to check the locks herself. "We'll have a car outside around the clock," she said. "You'll be okay here." After she left, the house settled into quiet. Eli slept beside me in a portable crib, his soft breaths filling the space between fear and hope. I sat by the window, watching the trees sway under the weight of snow. Every shadow outside felt alive, every flicker of light a possible movement. But beneath the fear was something else, a growing certainty that this wasn't the end of the story. Megan was still out there, circling like a storm that refused to pass. And I was no longer just a bystander to her madness. I was the wall she would crash against. I touched the photograph of Daniel on the table and whispered, "She's coming for us, but I'm ready this time." Outside, wind howled across the frozen lake, carrying with it a sound that almost resembled a cry. I held Eli closer and closed my eyes. In the distance, somewhere unseen, the storm gathered its strength. The safe house sat at the end of a narrow road lined with tall pines, their branches heavy with snow. By morning, sunlight filtered weakly through them, scattering patches of gold on the floor. For a brief moment, I could almost pretend life was ordinary again. Coffee brewing, the faint hum of the heater, Eli giggling as he kicked at his blanket. But beneath that fragile peace was the steady hum of tension, a pulse I could not quiet. Detective Briggs stopped by early, carrying a small box of files. She set it on the table and poured herself a cup of coffee without asking. "We've confirmed Megan's car was found abandoned about 40 miles south," she said. Inside, there was a motel receipt and a few empty bottles. "We're combing through surveillance footage." I watched her flip through photographs and reports, each one a reminder of how far Megan had fallen from the woman I once thought I knew. "Do you ever get used to this?" I asked quietly. Briggs looked up, eyes tired but kind. "No, but you learn not to look for sense where there isn't any." She closed the file. "You did everything right, Helen. You saved that baby. You're saving him still." Her words should have comforted me, but instead they carried weight. Saving someone means carrying them, and carrying means never really setting them down. After she left, I took Eli for a short walk outside. The air was sharp, each breath turning to mist. The world felt both vast and small, as though every sound could betray our hiding place. I hummed softly, a song Daniel's father used to play on the porch guitar when the world was gentler. Eli blinked up at me, his tiny hand clutching my scarf. When we returned inside, the house phone rang. It startled me. It was supposed to be a private line. I picked up cautiously. "Helen Carter?" a woman's voice said. "This is Caroline Hughes from the county office. I'm reviewing your custody petition." Relief flickered. "Yes, of course," I said. She hesitated. "I received a letter this morning, a statement opposing your petition. It was signed by Megan Carter." My stomach tightened. "What did it say?" "That you fabricated the events surrounding the lake," she continued. "She claims you've suffered from mental instability since your son's death and that you've been trying to take her child out of grief." For a moment, I couldn't speak. "And you believe her?" Caroline's voice softened. "Not necessarily, but the court will require a full psychological assessment before finalizing custody. It's standard in contested cases." I thanked her, though the word tasted bitter. After hanging up, I sat in silence, staring at the phone. Megan was playing a different game now. If she couldn't win through violence, she'd use the system. When Detective Briggs returned that afternoon, I told her about the call. She clenched her jaw. "She's trying to discredit you. It's classic manipulation. We'll handle it." But I knew this battle would be fought on two fronts now: justice and perception. And perception, in a small town, is a fragile thing. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the fireplace, watching the flames flicker low. The wind outside pushed against the windows, whispering like the voice of doubt itself. What if the court believed her? What if the years ahead were just hearings and headlines, not peace? I turned toward Eli's crib. He stirred slightly, making a soft noise, and I reached out to rest my hand on his chest, feeling the steady rise and fall beneath my palm. That tiny rhythm grounded me. Whatever Megan tried to twist, truth had a heartbeat, and I could feel it right there. Near midnight, my phone buzzed again. A text this time. No name attached, just words glowing on the small screen. "You can't erase me, Helen. He'll know who his real mother is someday." My hands went cold. I called Briggs immediately. She told me not to reply, not to feed the fire. But after I hung up, I sat there staring at the message. My reflection in the screen looked older, harder. I whispered to it, as if Megan could hear me through the distance. "He'll know, love, not your fear. That's what he'll remember." The words steadied me. I deleted the message, closed my phone, and went to bed. As I drifted toward sleep, I realized that the fight wasn't just for Eli's safety anymore. It was for the story he'd one day inherit. The truth of who saved him, who tried to destroy him, and how love, quiet and steadfast, chose to rise from the wreckage. Outside, the snow began to fall again, covering the roads that led back to the lake. Morning sunlight stretched through the window of the safe house like thin gold ribbons. Eli woke early, his soft babbling filling the room with warmth. I held him close, his tiny body pressed against mine, and for a few blessed minutes, it was just us. No detectives, no phone calls, no threats, just the sound of life continuing. When the knock came at the door, it startled me. I froze, every muscle tightening. Then a familiar voice called, "It's Briggs." Relief flooded through me. She stepped inside, brushing snow from her coat, a folder tucked beneath her arm. "We've got progress," she said. "A sighting about 20 miles north. A motel clerk recognized her from the news. She paid cash, but left something behind." "What was it?" Briggs pulled out a small photo, a snapshot of Daniel, Megan, and me, taken 2 years ago at a 4th of July cookout. I remembered the moment, the smoke from the grill, Daniel laughing, Megan's hand resting lightly on his arm. My throat tightened. "She kept this?" "She circled your face in red ink," Briggs said softly. "She's obsessed, Helen. She doesn't want money anymore. She wants control." The air in the room seemed to shrink. "Does she know where we are?" "Not yet, but she's close. We think she's still circling the county, using back roads." Briggs looked at Eli, who was cooing in my arms. "She's unpredictable, but she's running out of places to hide." After she left, I sat by the fire, staring at the photo. The red circle around my face looked almost ritualistic, like a mark. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about erasure. Megan wanted to erase me from the story. Later that afternoon, Ruth called. "Helen, you've made the local news again. They're talking about the custody battle." My chest tightened. "What are they saying?" "That there's a dispute over who's fit to raise the child. They're airing pieces of Megan's lawyer's statement, claims about your mental health. It's ugly." I thanked her for warning me, then turned off my phone. I sat in silence, the hum of the heater filling the room. It's strange how a lie can travel faster than any truth ever could. All it takes is a whisper, dressed as sympathy. I looked at Eli, his eyes bright and unbothered, and thought, "You'll never know this part of the story. I'll carry it so you don't have to." As night fell, I packed a small bag, formula, diapers, a blanket, and sat by the window. Snow had stopped falling, but the cold was sharper now, biting at the edges of the glass. Somewhere out there, Megan was moving through that same cold, hunting for a way back into a life she had destroyed. Around midnight, the phone rang again. It wasn't Briggs this time. It was Megan. Her voice was calm, measured, as if we were discussing a family dinner. "You've taken everything from me," she said. "You did that yourself," I replied. "You think you're the hero," she said, her tone turning brittle. "You think raising him makes you his mother. But he'll grow up knowing I loved him enough to fight for him." "You call that love?" I asked quietly. "You left him to die in the dark." A pause. Then, in a voice almost tender, she said, "He should have died with Daniel. That would have been mercy." I felt something inside me break. "You're sick, Megan." "Maybe," she whispered, "but sickness doesn't mean I've stopped being his mother." Then the line went dead. I stood there, the dial tone buzzing faintly in my ear, the silence afterward louder than any scream. My first instinct was to call Briggs, but I didn't move. I needed a moment to breathe, to let the fury and fear settle into something usable. I went to Eli's crib. He was asleep, face soft and untroubled. I brushed a curl from his forehead and whispered, "You'll never hear her words. I'll build a wall of love so thick her voice can't reach you." When the police arrived minutes later, I handed the phone to Briggs. She listened to the recording, Megan's voice, cold and certain, and nodded grimly. "She's losing control. But now we have her words, her intent. That's enough to make this more than just custody. It's attempted murder, documented." I looked at Eli again. For the first time, justice didn't feel like revenge. It felt like a boundary, finally set. Outside, the moon broke through the clouds, its reflection trembling across the frozen lake in the distance. I watched it until the light blurred. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like the water was waiting to take something from me. It was waiting to give something back. Freedom. The next morning dawned pale and brittle, the kind of cold that made every sound sharper. I stood at the window of the safe house with Eli in my arms, watching a group of deer move slowly through the trees. Their breath fogged the air, each exhale a small miracle of survival. I found myself thinking how much we had in common. Creatures who only wanted peace, but had to stay alert to live another day. Detective Briggs arrived just after breakfast, bringing a quiet storm of paperwork and resolve. She looked more tired than usual, her eyes red-rimmed from too many nights without rest. "We've got her," she said, before even taking off her gloves. A farmer near Pine Creek saw a woman walking through his field just before dawn. She tried to hide in his barn when she heard his truck start. When the deputies arrived, she gave them a false name, but she didn't get far. I felt my knees weaken. "She's in custody?" "Yes," Briggs said, sitting down. "She's being processed now." They found a loaded gun in her backpack and another photograph of you and the baby. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Relief came first, then guilt, then something I couldn't name. I had spent so long fearing her shadow that I hadn't prepared myself for what it would feel like when it was finally gone. Briggs reached across the table and placed a hand over mine. "You can exhale now, Helen. It's over." But I wasn't sure I believed her. The past doesn't vanish just because someone locks a door behind it. Later that day, I drove into town with Ruth to give my official statement. The police station buzzed with restrained energy. Reporters lingered outside, their cameras glinting like insects hungry for light. As I walked through the doors, I heard one of them whisper my name, and I realized that, whether I liked it or not, my grief had become a story the world wanted to watch. Inside, Detective Briggs guided me to a small interview room. "You'll need to confirm a few details for the record," she said. "After that, you can go home." Home. The word had never felt more complicated. I sat under the buzzing light and told the truth again, from Daniel's death to the lake, to every phone call and note. Briggs listened quietly, occasionally glancing through the glass window as other officers passed. When I finished, she closed the file with a soft thud. "The district attorney is filing charges. First-degree murder for your son, attempted murder for the baby, and harassment. She'll face a lifetime sentence, Helen." I nodded slowly. "Does she know what she's done?" Briggs looked down at her hands. "She knows. But remorse and understanding are not the same thing. When I left the station, the cold air hit my face like a new beginning." Ruth squeezed my arm as we walked to the car. "It's finally over," she said. "Maybe," I answered. "But some endings don't feel like freedom right away." That night, back at the lake house, I placed Eli in his crib and sat beside the fire. The silence was thicker than usual, almost reverent. I realized how long it had been since I had allowed myself to rest. The fear that once filled every corner of the house had lifted, leaving behind something gentler but also emptier. I found myself whispering into the quiet. "Daniel, it's done. She can't hurt him anymore." The words trembled, half prayer, half promise. Eli stirred in his sleep, and I leaned close to watch his chest rise and fall. That rhythm, The proof of life was enough. Before bed, I stepped onto the porch. The night was calm, stars scattered across the frozen sky. The lake below was still, solid now, sealed under ice. It no longer looked like the place of horror that had once defined it. It looked like a boundary between what had been lost and what still remained. In that moment, I understood something I hadn't before. Love isn't the opposite of fear. It's what endures beneath it. And courage isn't loud. It's a quiet grandmother standing at her window, refusing to look away. I went back inside, kissed Eli's forehead, and turned off the light. For the first time in months, I slept without dreams. I woke before dawn to the faint sound of the wind shifting across the lake. It had a different rhythm now, soft, almost forgiving. Eli was still asleep, his small chest rising in that fragile, perfect rhythm I'd learned to match my breathing to. The house felt both unfamiliar and sacred, as if the walls themselves understood that something had finally changed. By mid-morning, Detective Briggs called. "She confessed, Helen," she said quietly. She admitted to cutting the brake lines, to planning everything after she found out about the insurance. She said she thought she could start over with the money. I closed my eyes and let the words settle. I should have felt triumph, or at least closure. Instead, I felt a wave of sadness that almost made me dizzy. "And what about Eli?" I asked. Briggs sighed. She said she never meant to hurt him, that she panicked when she realized what he represented. That's what she called him, a reminder. A reminder. The word burned. To me, he was the opposite of that. He was proof that even in the ashes of betrayal, something pure could still rise. After the call, I wrapped Eli in his blanket and sat by the window. The sky was pale blue, the color of forgiveness I wasn't ready to offer. I thought about Megan, sitting in a cell somewhere, her face probably calm again, her voice controlled. I wondered if she was thinking about the lake, about how close she came to ending everything. I wondered if she missed Daniel, or if love had been nothing more than a convenient disguise for her hunger. Ruth stopped by around noon with soup and her steady hands. "I saw the news," she said softly. "It's all out there now. Everyone knows." "Everyone thinks knowing is the same as understanding," I said. "It isn't." She reached over and touched Eli's tiny foot. "He's the beginning, Helen. The rest of it, the whispers, the headlines, that's just noise." We ate together quietly. When she left, the house felt lighter. I put on one of Daniel's old records, a scratchy jazz tune he loved. The sound filled the rooms like sunlight through old glass, uneven but beautiful. Eli gurgled at the music, his eyes bright. I lifted him, swaying slowly with the rhythm. For the first time since the night at the lake, I allowed myself to imagine a future. Small, ordinary moments strung together like beads. Pancakes in the morning. Walks by the water when spring returned. Laughter that didn't carry pain inside it. That evening, Detective Briggs stopped by one last time. She looked less like a detective now and more like a friend. "I wanted you to hear this from me," she said. "The district attorney is moving forward with the charges. You won't have to testify again unless you choose to. We'll protect your privacy." "Thank you," I said, "for everything." Briggs smiled. "You did the saving, Helen. I just followed the trail you refused to give up on." She glanced toward Eli, sleeping peacefully in the crib. "He's lucky. Most stories like this don't end with light." After she left, I stood for a long time in the doorway, watching the snow drift down in slow, graceful spirals. I thought about all the women who live in quiet wars, those who are doubted, dismissed, and told to keep the peace when peace means losing themselves. Maybe this story wasn't just mine. Maybe it belonged to them too. I went to Eli's crib, traced my fingers lightly over his hair, and whispered, "You are the proof that love can outlast cruelty. That dignity and freedom aren't gifts, they're choices." As I turned off the lamp, I glanced once more at the lake through the window. It shimmered faintly in the moonlight, a mirror of everything that had been taken and everything that remained. For the first time, I didn't see death in its stillness. I saw rebirth. Winter began to soften its grip on the town. The snow that had blanketed everything for months melted in slow, uneven patches, revealing the stubborn green beneath. The lake, once a mirror of fear and loss, began to thaw. Water traced new lines through the cracks in the ice, small rivers returning to life. I stood on the porch one morning with Eli in my arms and felt the faintest warmth in the wind. It smelled of earth, of something that wanted to grow again. The trial was set for spring. The courthouse would be 3 towns over, far enough that I could almost pretend it was happening to someone else. Detective Briggs called to tell me that Megan's lawyers were pushing for a plea deal, but the district attorney refused. "We'll let the jury see who she really is," Briggs said. "She won't walk away from this." Still, the thought of seeing Megan again made my stomach twist. I hadn't laid eyes on her since the night she came to my door. Sometimes I imagined what I'd say if I did. I practiced in my mind, words about boundaries, betrayal, dignity, but when I pictured her face, I realized there was nothing left to say. Truth doesn't need an audience. That afternoon, Ruth stopped by with groceries and a knitted blanket in shades of blue and cream. "For him," she said, tucking it around Eli's tiny feet. "A new beginning deserves something made by hand." "Thank you," I said, my throat tight. "You've been through fire, Helen," she said softly. "Now it's time to live in the light." Later, while Eli napped, I walked to the edge of the lake. The ice had broken into long, jagged shards, drifting lazily on the surface. I crouched down and touched the water. It was still cold, but not hostile anymore. For months, I'd seen it as a grave. Now it looked like a mirror, a place that reflected what you chose to face. When I came back inside, a letter was waiting on the kitchen table. It bore the seal of the family court. My heart pounded as I opened it. Inside was a single page, the official notice granting me full and permanent custody of Eli Carter. My hands shook as I read the words twice, 3 times, to be sure they were real. I sat down, tears blurring the ink. For so long, survival had been my only goal. Now, for the first time, there was more. Life beyond fear. I called Detective Briggs to tell her. She congratulated me and said quietly, "This is justice, Helen. The kind that lasts." After hanging up, I went to Eli's crib and lifted him into my arms. He blinked up at me, half awake, and smiled, a small, sleepy curve of his lips that reminded me of Daniel in his gentlest moments. "You're home now," I whispered. "You're mine, and you always will be." That evening, Ruth joined us for dinner. We ate by the fire, laughter threading through the conversation like something fragile and precious. When she left, I walked her to the door. The sky was deep violet, stars beginning to show. She hugged me tightly. "It's time to rest, my friend," she said. "You've earned it." After she drove away, I sat alone in the quiet house. It felt different now. Still the same walls, the same creaking floors, but lighter, as if grief had finally loosened its hold. I placed the custody papers beside Daniel's photograph on the mantel and whispered, "We did it." Outside, the lake shimmered under the first true moon of spring. The water, once a place of horror, now carried reflection, memory, and peace. I realized that healing isn't sudden. It's built one breath at a time, one brave choice after another. I looked at Eli sleeping, safe and warm, and understood something simple and absolute. Love had won. Not easily, not without scars, but completely. Tomorrow, we would plant flowers by the porch, maybe take a walk through town, start building new memories that didn't come from pain. But tonight, I let myself just sit there, quiet, surrounded by the echoes of everything that had tried to destroy us, and the proof that it hadn't. The lake outside was no longer a reminder of what had been lost. It was a witness to what had survived. Spring arrived fully now, bold and unapologetic. The air carried the scent of damp earth and lilacs, and the lake, once a mirror of tragedy, was alive again with ripples of light. I took Eli outside every morning, wrapped in Ruth's knitted blanket, and sat on the porch with a cup of coffee while he gurgled at the birds. For the first time in a long time, silence didn't mean fear. It meant peace. News of Megan's trial had spread quickly through town, and though I avoided the articles, they still found their way to my porch, left by well-meaning neighbors or delivered with my mail. Words like cold-blooded, greed, and betrayal were printed in bold headlines. I folded each paper neatly and placed them in a drawer. The world could have its version of the story. Mine was here, breathing softly in a crib by my side. Ruth visited often, always with something in her hands, a pie, a bouquet, a story meant to make me laugh. One afternoon she asked, "Do you ever think about forgiving her?" The question lingered in the air. "Forgiveness is a strange word," I said. "It sounds peaceful, but it isn't. It's heavy. I don't know if I'll ever give it to her, but I won't let her live rent-free in my heart either." "That's enough." Ruth nodded, her eyes warm. "Then that's your peace." Later that day, I took a walk to the water's edge. The thaw had finished, and the lake shimmered with new clarity. I carried a small box with me, a few of Daniel's belongings I'd kept since his death. His wedding ring, his old pocket knife, and a photograph of him holding newborn Eli. I knelt at the bank, the ground soft beneath me, and whispered, "You can rest now, my boy. We're safe. He's safe." Then I placed the box into the water and watched it drift for a moment before sinking. The ripples spread wide, catching sunlight until they disappeared. When I returned to the house, Detective Briggs was waiting on the porch. She wore a simple smile that looked different from her usual guarded calm. "I wanted to tell you in person," she said. "The trial begins next week, but you don't have to testify if you don't want to. We have enough." I nodded slowly. "I'll be there," I said. "Not for her, for him, for both of them." Briggs studied me for a moment, then said softly, "You've carried more than most could bear, Helen. Don't forget to put some of it down." That night, after Eli fell asleep, I sat by the window watching the moon rise over the lake. I thought about everything that had led us here, every choice, every fracture, every act of survival. Life, I realized, isn't a single story. It's a collection of them, some dark, some luminous, all woven together by the stubborn will to keep going. I took out my journal, the one Daniel had given me years ago, still half empty. I began to write, not the horror, not the headlines, but the truth, about the woman I used to be and the one I was becoming. About boundaries and dignity, about how love sometimes means standing your ground, even when your legs are shaking, about how you can lose everything and still wake up one day to sunlight on your face and a child's laughter filling the room. As I wrote, the sound of the wind through the pines became almost musical. I realized that healing doesn't announce itself. It slips quietly into your life, disguised as ordinary moments. A cup of coffee, a baby's breath, a day without fear. When I finally closed the journal, I felt lighter. I looked at Eli sleeping and whispered, "You'll grow up knowing strength, not silence." Outside, the lake gleamed like glass, calm and endless. For the first time, it reflected not grief, but promise. And I understood then that the story wasn't ending. It was simply turning a page. The courthouse in Madison was smaller than I expected, more ordinary. Beige walls, fluorescent lights, the faint smell of coffee and disinfectant. Still, as I carried Eli through the doors, the air felt heavier, like stepping into the heart of every storm that had chased us here. Ruth walked beside me, steady and silent, her hand occasionally brushing my shoulder in quiet reassurance. Detective Briggs met us in the hallway, her usual composure softened by something like pride. "You don't have to stay the whole day," she said gently. "But if you want to be here when it starts, we'll make sure you're seated where she can't reach you." "I'm staying," I said. "I need to see this through." She nodded once, understanding. Inside the courtroom, the low murmur of reporters and spectators faded as the judge entered. Megan sat at the defense table in a plain gray suit, her hair tied back, her face calm but hollow. When she turned slightly and her eyes met mine, I felt no anger, only distance, like looking at someone through a pane of thick glass. The prosecutor began with simple facts: the insurance, the altered will, the night at the lake. Each word struck like a small hammer against stone. I listened without flinching. Every detail was a piece of truth I had already lived through in silence. When the prosecutor showed the photo of Daniel, my breath caught. I had almost forgotten the curve of his smile, the way he tilted his head slightly whenever someone took his picture. I closed my eyes for a second, letting the memory wash over me. Then I looked at Eli sleeping peacefully in Ruth's arms across the aisle. His face was Daniel's mercy made new. Megan didn't look at the photo. She stared straight ahead, expression unreadable. When her lawyer finally rose to speak, his voice was smooth, practiced. He talked about grief, about trauma, about desperation. He used words like fragile and broken mind. I felt the room shift slightly, sympathy stretching toward her like a hesitant hand. But then the prosecutor played the recording, the phone call Megan made to me, her voice cold and deliberate. He should have died with Daniel. That would have been mercy. The courtroom went still. Even her lawyer lowered his eyes. In that silence, truth finally stood on its own, unflinching. When I was called to the stand, my legs trembled but held. The oath felt heavier than I imagined. But when I began to speak, my voice came steady. I told the story as it happened, not for revenge, but for record, for legacy, for Eli. I spoke of silent abuse, of boundaries crossed and ignored, of the moment love became survival. I told them that I pulled my grandson from the water because sometimes justice begins in a pair of shaking hands that refuse to let go. When I finished, the judge thanked me and told me I could step down. As I passed Megan, she finally looked up. Her eyes were wet, but I couldn't tell if it was regret or performance, maybe both. I stopped for a brief moment, just long enough to say softly, "You could have asked for help. You didn't have to destroy everything." Her lips trembled, but no words came. I walked away. Outside the courtroom, the sky had turned bright and clear. Reporters called my name, microphones flashing, but I didn't stop. Ruth shielded me as we made our way to the car. The cold air felt clean, almost merciful. On the ride home, Eli slept, his small head resting against my shoulder. The radio played softly, a hymn, the same one they'd played at Daniel's memorial. But this time, it didn't sound like mourning. It sounded like something else entirely. Release. When we reached the house, I carried Eli inside and set him in his crib. I watched him for a long time, my heart both aching and full. "Your father's story ended in pain," I whispered, "but yours begins with peace. That's the justice he would have wanted." The wind outside rustled through the trees, no longer a warning but a lullaby. I sat beside the window, eyes on the lake, and let the quiet settle around me. Some battles end not with triumph, but with grace. And sometimes that's the braver kind of victory. Verdict day arrived beneath a sky the color of pewter, heavy and expectant. I dressed Eli in a soft blue onesie and tucked him beneath Ruth's care before heading to the courthouse. The drive felt longer than it was, each mile pulling me closer to the end of something I'd been carrying too long. When I entered the courtroom, it was almost silent. Megan sat at the defense table, hands clasped tightly, lips pressed thin. For the first time, she looked small, not the cold, defiant woman who had haunted my nights, but a hollow version of herself. Detective Briggs stood near the back, arms folded, her gaze steady and protective. The judge's voice filled the room. "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty on all counts." There was no outburst, no dramatic cry, just a collective exhale, the sound of justice breathing at last. I felt my body shake, not from shock, but from release. The tension that had lived inside me for months began to unravel, thread by thread. Megan turned once, her eyes finding mine. For a moment, the years between us vanished. The dinners, the holidays, the laughter that once filled our shared home. I saw not a monster, but a woman lost in her own storm, one who had chosen ruin when love demanded responsibility. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but the guards moved her toward the door. I didn't follow with my eyes. Some goodbyes don't need witnesses. Outside, the air was cold and clean. Reporters waited, their cameras flashing like a sudden summer storm. I kept walking, each step lighter than the one before. Ruth met me by the car, her smile trembling through tears. "It's over," she said. "Almost," I replied. "Now we begin again." When we returned home, Eli was asleep in his crib, his small hand resting against his cheek. The light from the window painted his skin gold. I stood there watching him breathe, realizing that every choice I'd made, the fear, the courage, the sleepless nights, had led to this single, quiet moment. He was safe. He was home. Detective Briggs stopped by later that afternoon. She removed her hat and smiled softly. "It's done, Helen. She'll never walk free again." The judge denied parole eligibility. Life sentence. I nodded, the words sinking deep but not heavy. "Do you ever feel peace after something like this?" Briggs hesitated. "Not peace, but closure sometimes. And maybe that's enough." After she left, I took Eli for a walk along the lake. The ice was gone now, replaced by gentle waves that lapped at the shore. The water no longer frightened me. It seemed almost to hum, as if carrying the memory of what it had witnessed and choosing to keep it still. I knelt by the water's edge, holding Eli close. "This is where we began," I told him. "Not in fear, but in fight. Not in loss, but in love." He gurgled softly, as if answering. The sun broke through the clouds then, and the surface of the lake shimmered in gold. For the first time in months, I felt warmth on my face, not the kind that fades, but the kind that stays. We walked home together, the path lined with tiny green shoots pushing through the soil, life returning. That evening, I wrote Daniel's name in my journal and beneath it, Eli's. Between them, I left space, empty, intentional, a reminder that love doesn't end where loss begins. It continues quietly, reshaping itself into purpose. As night fell, I rocked Eli in my arms until his eyes closed. His weight against my chest was the rhythm of peace itself. I whispered to him, "We made it through, little one. And now we live." Outside, the lake glowed faintly under the moonlight, no longer a witness to tragedy, but to resilience. It didn't ask for forgiveness. It simply existed, vast and calm, holding the reflection of two lives that had survived everything meant to drown them. Summer came slowly, like someone knocking softly before entering a room. The trees filled out in deep green, and the lake shimmered beneath long days that stretched into golden evenings. Life began to feel ordinary again, something I had once thought impossible. Ordinary was a miracle now. Eli had learned to crawl, his small hands slapping against the wooden floors as he followed the sound of my voice. His laughter filled the house the way music fills a church, turning ordinary air into something sacred. I watched him every day and thought, this is what survival looks like. The town moved on in its quiet way. People still whispered when they saw me at the grocery store, but their looks had softened. Pity had turned to respect. Even the newspaper printed a final piece calling the story a testament to strength. I clipped it, not because I needed validation, but because one day Eli might. Detective Briggs stopped by one evening with 2 cups of coffee. She had been reassigned to another district, but wanted to say goodbye. "I thought you'd want this," she said, handing me a small box. Inside was Daniel's wedding band, the one recovered from police evidence after the trial. "It belongs with you." I held it for a long time, feeling its weight. "Thank you," I said softly. "I'll keep it for him until his son is old enough to understand." We sat on the porch, the lake glowing amber in the setting sun. "You know," Briggs said, "people always ask me about the hardest part of my job. They expect me to say crime scenes or lies, but it's not that. It's walking away after justice and realizing justice doesn't heal what was broken. Only love does." Her words stayed with me long after she left. That night, I placed Daniel's ring in a small wooden box beside the custody papers and the first photo ever taken of Eli. They were all parts of the same truth: grief, courage, renewal. Proof that even in loss, there can be beauty. Ruth visited the next morning with strawberries from her garden. We sat at the kitchen table, watching Eli smear juice across his cheeks. He's got your stubborn streak, she laughed. He's got his father's heart, I said. She smiled, touching my hand. You did it, Helen. You gave him a life. I looked at her, then at the sunlight streaming through the curtains. We both did, I said. You never let me fall apart. Later that afternoon, I took Eli down to the lake. The air smelled of pine and wet soil, and the water moved gently, whispering against the shore. I spread a blanket on the grass and sat with him, his tiny fingers reaching for the sky. The spot where I had pulled the suitcase from months ago was now just another patch of calm water. The ghosts had quieted. I told Eli stories while he played with blades of grass. About Daniel, about courage, about how silence is not the same as peace. You come from love, I said. Messy, complicated, unbreakable love. As the sun dipped low, the lake turned gold again, and I realized something simple but profound. This place no longer frightened me. It had tested me, yes, but it had also revealed me. The lake had taken what it wanted and left me with what I needed. When we walked back to the house, fireflies blinked through the dusk, tiny sparks of life floating above the grass. Eli reached out toward them, laughing as if he believed he could catch the light. I carried him inside, his head resting on my shoulder, his small heartbeat steady against mine. I looked once more at the lake through the window before closing the curtains. It shimmered in the distance, quiet and eternal, a witness not to pain anymore, but to endurance. Love had survived the water, and so had we. 5 years have passed. The seasons have come and gone over this lake like pages turning, and each one has written a new line in our story. The house still creaks in the same places. The porch still smells faintly of cedar and rain, but now there is laughter echoing through every room. Eli is 5 years old, bright, curious, fearless. He runs across the yard chasing the dog Ruth insisted we adopt, his laughter carrying across the water. He calls me Grandma Helen, but sometimes, when he's sleepy and soft with dreams, he whispers, Mama Helen, and I let him. It's not confusion, it's love, finding its own name. Ruth still visits every Sunday. We bake bread, talk about Daniel, and sit by the window watching the sun sink behind the trees. Time has softened her too, though her wit remains sharp enough to cut through any silence. You made it, she said last week, pouring coffee for both of us. You climbed out of the fire and built a garden. She's right. The garden behind the house is wild and beautiful, roses, lilies, and a single oak sapling Daniel planted before he died. Eli helps me water it, splashing more on himself than the soil. Each bloom feels like a heartbeat, proof that love can root itself even in scorched ground. Sometimes people ask about Megan. They whisper her name with curiosity, as though tragedy were a kind of inheritance. I tell them the truth. She's serving life in a state facility. I don't visit, and I don't hate her anymore. Hatred is too heavy to carry into the future. I let the system hold her story. Mine belongs to the living. I've learned that survival isn't a single act. It's a choice you make every day to show up, to breathe, to love anyway. For years, I thought strength meant endurance. But now I know it means tenderness. The courage to remain kind after the world has tried to harden you. Eli starts kindergarten this fall. When I watch him sleep, his small face lit by the glow of the nightlight, I see Daniel's eyes. There's comfort in that resemblance now, not pain. It's as if my son left me a map through his child, a way to keep walking forward without losing sight of where we began. This morning we walked down to the lake. The water was calm, glassy, reflecting the wide blue of the sky. Eli tossed a pebble into it and laughed at the ripples. It looks like it's breathing, he said. I smiled. Maybe it is, I told him. Everything that's lived through pain learns how to breathe again. He turned to me then, his eyes curious. Grandma, is this where you found me? I knelt beside him, my heart steady. Yes, I said, right here. But the lake didn't just give me you. It gave me another chance. He slipped his small hand into mine, and together we watched the ripples fade until the water stilled again. The wind moved through the trees with a sound like a sigh, neither sorrow nor joy, just life, continuing. As we walked back up the path, I looked at the world around me, green grass, the smell of summer, the hum of bees, and realized how far we had come. The shadows had loosened their grip, and what remained was simple: love, peace, and a kind of justice no courtroom could ever grant. That night, after Eli fell asleep, I sat by the window one last time with my journal. I wrote the final words I had been waiting years to say. This story began with water and fear, but it ends with light and forgiveness. I am not what happened to me. I am what I chose to do after. Outside, the lake shimmered under the moon, silver and still. It no longer felt like a witness. It felt like a companion. And as I closed the journal, I whispered into the quiet, "We made it, Daniel. He's safe. I'm free." The water answered only with its calm reflection, and that was enough. There are moments in life when the air itself seems to hold memory, when the light in a room feels like a whisper of everyone you've ever loved and lost. Standing by the window that morning, watching Eli chase sunlight through the yard, I understood that our story had come full circle. The house that once echoed with grief now pulsed with laughter. The lake that once tried to take everything from me had become the horizon of our peace. In 5 years, I have learned more about love than in all the decades before it. I learned that love is not a promise of safety. It is the courage to keep caring even after the world has shown you its cruelty. I learned that strength can wear a soft voice. That dignity isn't about being unbroken. It's about standing up with grace again and again, even when your heart trembles. Some nights, I still dream of the water. But in those dreams, the lake isn't dark anymore. It's bright, rippling with gold, the way it looks on summer evenings when the sun falls low and everything glows. Daniel is there, younger, laughing, and Eli runs toward him, fearless and free. I wake smiling, not in sorrow, but in gratitude, because in a world that can take so much, it gave me this, a second chance. I sometimes think of Megan too. I wonder if she ever feels the weight of what she did, or if she has found her own version of peace behind those walls. I no longer wish her pain. Justice has done its part. Forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's refusing to keep bleeding. And I have no more blood left to give her. Eli's voice pulls me from those thoughts. He's on the porch, calling for me to see the first fireflies of the season. Their light flickers through the dusk like tiny promises. I step outside, the air warm, the sky deep and kind. He reaches for my hand, and together we watch the world turn gold one last time before night settles in. This is our story now, one of boundaries and beginnings, of courage reclaimed. I've placed the fear where it belongs, in the past. What remains is love, steady and wide, like the lake that has seen it all and stayed silent, holding our reflection. If this story touched your heart, please like the video and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next one. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Your support helps keep these voices alive. And if you are ready for another powerful journey, click the story appearing on your screen right now. See you in the next life story, with love and respect.